The town of Willow Creek was like any other quiet corner of America: a few streets, a couple of cafes, a library, an old park, and a bridge that the locals called the Bridge to Nowhere. This bridge was one of the town's major legends. The locals whispered that it was associated with many unexplained events, and despite its appearance of ordinariness, no one dared to cross it after sunset. Stories of strange occurrences were passed down from generation to generation. People said that the bridge seemed to have a life of its own. Those who tried to cross it in the fog disappeared, sometimes forever. Others came back days later, remembering nothing. Amy grew up in this town and always thought the bridge was just part of the scary local tales. As a child, she and her friends would even play by the river, scaring each other with stories about the bridge. But as she got older, those stories stopped seeming like anything fun to her. Amy returned to Willow Creek from the big city to care for her sick mother. She lived a quiet life, working at the local school and often taking walks along the river in the evenings. One day she had to reconsider her views on the tales of the bridge. This evening Amy went for a walk as usual. The sky had clouded over and a light mist had begun to creep in from the river, enveloping the bridge. Stepping onto the path leading to the bridge, she suddenly felt the air grow denser. The bridge looked strange, like it was older than she remembered it. The wooden planks were darkened by time, and the railings were covered in moss. As soon as Amy took her first step onto the bridge, everything around her seemed to freeze. The fog grew thicker, and the familiar sounds, the rustling of leaves, the babbling of the river, the chirping of grasshoppers, disappeared. She felt her heart quicken. A low whisper came from far away. "Hey! Who's there?" she asked loudly, trying to see something in the thick fog. There was no answer, but the whispering grew stronger, turning into something that sounded like words, but unintelligible and alien. Amy hurried back to the shore. When her feet touched the ground, the sounds returned instantly. The river rumbled again, the birds chirped, and the wind rustled in the trees. Back home, she tried to shake off the strange feeling that the bridge seemed to be watching her. A few days later, Amy found out that her old friend Tim was missing. Tim was not only her friend, but one of the few people who had always believed in the mystical stories about the bridge. He had often teased her as a child, promising to one day solve the mystery of the place. Tim worked as a cab driver and was seen late at night coming home. His car was found parked by the path leading to the bridge. Inside everything looked normal. The keys were in the ignition, his phone was on the seat, but Tim himself was nowhere to be found. Amy decided she had to find out what had happened. She walked to the bridge, but it was quiet and empty. The only thing she found were footprints that led to the middle of the bridge, but then abruptly broke off. The locals began to say that Tim was another victim of the bridge to nowhere. A few nights later, Amy couldn't take it anymore. She felt guilty about her friend's disappearance and decided to go back to the bridge. This time she took a flashlight and a tape recorder with her to record anything that might happen there. The night was thickly shrouded in fog. Amy stopped in front of the bridge, illuminating it with her flashlight. At the other end of the bridge, she noticed movement. A tall, dark figure appeared in the fog. "Tim? Is that you?" shouted Amy, trying to shout over the sound of the wind, which had suddenly increased. The figure didn't move. It stood still, but its presence was almost palpable. Amy took a step onto the bridge. Her flashlight began to flicker, and the whispering filled the air again. But this time it was louder and more intelligible. "You know why you came?" She felt a chill creep up her spine. "Who are you?" she asked, peering into the darkness. The figure slowly raised its hand and pointed to the center of the bridge. Amy shone her flashlight on the spot and saw a strange symbol made of stones, a circle with intersecting lines and runes she couldn't make out. "You didn't come alone," the figure said in a low, vibrating voice. Amy took a step back, feeling panic rising in her chest. "Where's Tim? What have you done with him?" But the figure didn't answer. It slowly dissolved into the fog, leaving Amy alone on the bridge. She rushed back to the shore, barely holding back her tears. But her voice recorder now recorded the very words the figure had spoken. Back home, Amy tried to find an explanation for the symbol she had seen. She spent hours looking through books and articles about ancient signs and languages, but to no avail. A few days later, an envelope appeared on her doorstep. There was no address or sender's name on it. Inside was an old photograph of a bridge. On the back were the words, "Everyone makes their own choices. Tim already has." Amy realized that her friend was still alive, but somewhere outside the normal world. Now she had a choice to make: risk everything and go over the bridge, or lose Tim forever. Amy knew she couldn't back down any longer. The mysterious photograph and the words recorded on the dictaphone wouldn't leave her alone. She felt the bridge calling to her, just as it had called to Tim. The night before the decisive move, Amy prepared herself carefully. She carried a flashlight, a compass, a pocket knife, and an old notebook and pencil to jot down anything that might happen. But what reassured her most was the ring Tim had given her as a teenager, when they had made a promise to each other to always help no matter what happened. The sky was covered with thick clouds, and the moon only occasionally lit the way. As Amy approached the bridge, the fog shrouded everything around her again, this time even thicker. She took the first step. As soon as her shoe touched the old wooden plank, the air around her changed. It became sticky, dense, as if Amy was sinking into an invisible wall. The sounds of the world disappeared: no wind, no birds, just her own breathing. In the middle of the bridge, she saw the same stones again, laid out in the shape of a circle with runes. Now the symbols glowed with a soft bluish light. The whispering grew louder, it penetrated her consciousness. "Do you want to know the truth? Are you ready?" Amy turned around, but the bridge behind her was gone. Now she was standing in an endless fog with no beginning and no end. "Where am I?" she whispered, realizing her voice sounded muffled, as if she were speaking into a void. The whispering continued, ignoring her question. "Accept the choice. Accept the sacrifice." A figure appeared in front of her, the same silhouette she had seen before. But this time it was more distinct. It was a man, or something very much like a man, only his eyes glowed with a strange violet light. "You have come for a friend," he said, and his voice sounded as if it spoke from 1,000 throats at once. But salvation has a price. Amy stood in the center of a circle of stones that now glowed with a strange blue light. Each rune laid out on the ground seemed alive, pulsing as if responding to the rhythm of her heart. The air became dense, it seemed to vibrate with tension. A tall figure stood motionless to the side, watching her every movement. She no longer seemed like a mere shadow like before. Her face was still hidden under the hood, but her glowing violet eyes pierced through the fog, penetrating straight into Amy's soul. "You are here to open the gate," the figure spoke. The voice sounded like a chorus of people, each speaking a different language. "What gate? What do you want me to do?" Amy shouted, trying to contain her panic. The figure pointed to a glowing circle. "This circle is the crossing point of the worlds. You must complete the ritual to cross the line and find the one you seek. But remember, there is always a price." Amy felt a cold sweat run down her back. Her mind rebelled against what was happening, but some part of her, the part that was connected to Tim, knew there was no other choice. "What do I have to do?" The figure raised its hand again, and an antique mirror with a dark frame covered in strange patterns appeared in front of Amy. In the reflection she saw not herself, but an endless cosmos full of stars and mysterious shapes. "Look inside. Find your truth." "Find it," the figure said. Amy hesitantly reached out her hand toward the mirror. As soon as her fingers touched its surface, a coldness enveloped her entire body, and she felt the world around her disappear. She found herself in a completely different place. It was dark here, but the stars burned brightly in the black sky. There was nothing beneath her feet, only infinite space. "You have crossed the line," the figure's voice now sounded inside her head. "Here you will find what you seek. But know that every step brings you closer to the point of no return." Amy started to move forward, though she didn't see how it was possible without the ground beneath her feet. Tim reappeared in front of her, but he looked strange. His eyes were closed and his body seemed to shimmer. "Tim! It's me. Wake up," she shouted, but he didn't respond. Suddenly, a shadow, like the figure at the bridge, appeared behind him. Only this time it was huge, and it held out its hand toward Tim. "This is your sacrifice," the voice said. "You want him back, but are you willing to give up a part of yourself?" Amy felt the shadow looking at her. This time she heard not only whispers, but memories from her life, joys, regrets, fears. "Choose," the voice said. "Choose what?" Amy asked, feeling her hands shaking. "To get him back, you have to leave a part of your soul behind. Here. Forever." Amy's heart was pounding. She realized she had no other choice. If she left now, Tim would stay in this place forever. She took a step forward, feeling an invisible force pulling her. Shadow stopped and reached out to her. As soon as their hands made contact, Amy felt a part of her consciousness seem to be ripped from her. It was a pain beyond description, but at the same time she felt a strange relief. When Amy woke up, she was once again standing in a circle on the bridge. The fog was clearing and the symbols on the ground had stopped glowing. But there was Tim lying next to her. Tim! She screamed, kneeling down beside him. His eyes slowly opened and he looked up at her. Amy? How did you end up here? His voice was weak, but it was him. She helped him up and they left the bridge together. But before they left, the figure reappeared at the edge of the circle. You made a choice, she said. But your sacrifice will have consequences. Amy didn't answer. She knew that what had happened had left a scar in her soul, but she had her friend back, and that was what mattered most. Waking up, Amy realized she was lying on the ground by the bridge. Her flashlight was off and someone was standing next to her. Amy? A familiar voice sounded. She looked up and saw Tim. His face was soiled and his eyes seemed tired, but it was him. The real one. Tim! She shouted, rushing toward him. Tim was confused. He didn't remember what had happened, only how he had crossed the bridge and then found himself in a strange place full of lights and whispers. They want something. They're watching us, he said quietly. This place, it's not just a bridge. A mystery left unanswered. When they got back to town, Amy tried to remember what had happened. But the more she thought, the fewer details remained.